We live in a society that is filled with water consumption, from daily household uses like hygiene, drinking, and cleaning, to corporate consumption like livestock, agriculture, and fracking. But what if you're not able to access running water? What would you do? Indigenous folks across the country are faced with this problem at an alarming rate. Most do not have the access to running water, and in a crisis like a pandemic, they are posed with the question on how they are going to ration the water they are delivered. The average person outside of a reservation uses 100 gallons of water per day, opposed to the average 7 gallons of water a day from someone on the reservation. So, how would you ration your water?
To put the issue of water access into perspective, let us first consider the following statistics. On any given day in the United States, the average person will use 101.5 gallons of water. Although this figure might initially sound like a lot, the 101.5 gallons of water is primarily consumed by about 7 daily tasks. For bath takers, a filled tub requires about 36 gallons. Every flush of the toilet requires about 3 gallons. Taking a shower uses about 2 gallons each minute. A washing machine uses about 15 gallons per load. A dishwasher uses between 4 and 10 gallons per cycle. General hygiene uses about 2.5 gallons, and the recommended 8 glasses of 8-ounce drinking water is about a gallon. And remember, that's just the gallons used by the average individual. An average family uses about 300 gallons of water per day. If we pivot our attention to non-residential uses of water, we could see that on average, about 17% of water withdrawals from the public water supplies go to commercial and industrial sectors, which includes facilities like office buildings, hospitals, hotels, restaurants, industrial warehouses, and more. Additionally, the state of New Mexico on the whole uses about 3.4 trillion gallons of water per day.
Native reservations have historically been neglected in terms of infrastructure. However, the water crisis on reservations is particularly alarming. Extractive industries such as oil and gas companies or water mining or nuclear mining are water hogs and often poison groundwater resources. Any action being taken against this environmental injustice is community and nonprofit oriented. On the portion of Diné, also known as Navajo Reservation in New Mexico, only 40% of residents have access to running water. People also have to drive to the closest water pump, which is off the reservation, as far as 100 miles. Another source of water comes from Diné woman Darlene Arvizo, who is also the local school bus driver on the reservation. She delivers to 250 families roughly once a month. With water rights in place, the Diné people have access to the groundwater on the reservation. However, it is contaminated because of uranium mines, and there is a lack of proper infrastructure to ensure that groundwater can be distributed to each house.
Navigating COVID-19 in the Navajo community, the Navajo Nation and other tribal communities are disproportionately impacted by the barriers of health and the lack of infrastructure to help with the higher number of cases within the community. With a higher number of per capita cases of deaths than any state in the U.S., and with American Indians making up small percentages of the population in the states like New Mexico, with 9% being American Indian, and Arizona with 4% being American Indian, but accounting for 75% of COVID-19 deaths in New Mexico and 12% in Arizona. Throughout the pandemic, the Navajo community must solve a water crisis, where one well supplies the community with eroded pipes and undrinkable water, creating an urgency to get a hold of clean water for the community during the pandemic, where water is hard to come by.
GRIST, an environmental nonprofit news outlet, reported in May 2020 that the U.S. Department of Interior Bureau of Land Management just moved forward with its decision to hold a series of meetings to gather public input on a controversial oil and gas drilling plan for the Greater Chaco region, a culturally and spiritually significant area for the Pueblo and Navajo peoples of northwestern New Mexico. The plan could ultimately add more than 3,000 new oil and gas wells to the area. Air quality monitoring has already found unusually high and hazardous levels of particulate matter pollution in one of the affected counties. The exact kind of pollution exacerbated by the drilling has recently been linked to COVID-19 deaths and causes of cancer. President-elect Joe Biden proposed a ban on oil drilling, but for the state of New Mexico, this means a potential loss for billions of dollars in state revenue, causing many New Mexico state legislative officials to be wary of his proposal. Associated Press reports that the New Mexico Legislative Finance Committee has already started anticipating revenue losses of oil funding New Mexico due to low oil prices and people traveling less during the pandemic. The oil and mining sector has reported over 7,000 jobs lost since February 2020. Soon-to-be retired Senator John Arthur Smith urges his successors and the governor to find new revenue sources more reliable than oil. We believe queer justice is environmental justice. Oil drilling is poisoning sacred land and our vulnerable people in our communities. We demand New Mexico politicians to look for alternative revenue sources. Oil infiltrating water sources and our environment needs to end. Together we can stand up to oil companies and end their profiteering from poisoning all of our water, air, and land. And we highly recommend a data tax on internet advertisements and internet sales of Amazon company would be extremely useful for the funding of New Mexico's future.